Good evening, and welcome to the Sleep Files. Thank you for returning to the office, and welcome to anyone joining us for the first time. If you find comfort here, you're welcome to subscribe. And as always, this case can't wait until morning.
Tonight, we will be investigating a particular corner of history, one where power became personal, reality became flexible, and leadership took on some very unusual forms. Across different countries and eras, a small number of rulers reshaped their nations, not only through laws or force, but through personality, spectacle, and belief. Sit back and relax. This investigation is going to get bizarre. Sapar Murat Niyazov was the first president of Turkmenistan and one of the most unusual leaders of the modern era. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Niyazov emerged as the country's undisputed ruler, eventually adopting the title Turkmenbashi, meaning leader of the Turkmen people. From the beginning, his rule was defined not by policy, but by personality. Turkmenbashi did not merely want to govern the country. He wanted to reshape reality itself. One of his earliest projects was the creation of a spiritual and moral guidebook called the Ruhnama, part autobiography, part philosophy, part historical revision. The book was declared essential reading for all citizens. It was taught in schools, quoted on television, and tested in driving exams. To legally obtain a driver's license, citizens were required to demonstrate knowledge of Turkmenbashi's personal thoughts on life, history, and morality. The Ruhnama was treated less like a book and more like a sacred object. Mosques displayed it alongside religious texts. Public buildings engraved passages from it into stone. At one point, a giant mechanical version of the book was built in the desert, opening each night to project its pages onto a screen. This was not satire. This was state policy. Turkmenbashi's influence extended even into language itself. He renamed the months of the year. January became Turkmenbashi. April was renamed after his mother. September honored the Ruhnama. Days of the week were also renamed, because the existing ones were apparently insufficiently flattering. Words he disliked were simply removed from official usage. The word ballet disappeared. So did opera. Public performances of both were banned outright. Circus performances were also forbidden, on the grounds that they did not align with Turkmen values. Gold teeth were discouraged. Beards were frowned upon. Long hair on men was criticized on national television. At one point, Turkmenbashi declared that video games were spiritually harmful and should not exist. They vanished. He also banned recorded music on television, radios in cars, and lip-syncing at concerts. Professional musicians were told to perform live at all times, regardless of feasibility. The country's medical system was not spared. Turkmenbashi famously announced that hospitals outside the capital were unnecessary and ordered many of them closed. In rural areas, citizens were advised to simply come to the city if they were sick. Doctors were also informed that the Hippocratic Oath was outdated. Instead, they were encouraged to swear loyalty to Turkmenbashi. One of his more unusual public health recommendations involved chewing bones. He advised young people to chew on bones to strengthen their teeth, stating that dogs do it and they never complain. Statues of Turkmenbashi appeared everywhere. Most were gold. The most famous stood in the capital. a massive golden statue of Turkmenbashi that slowly rotated throughout the day, ensuring it always faced the sun. This was considered appropriate. His portrait was displayed in schools, offices, and private homes. Television broadcasts began with images of him. News anchors regularly referred to him using elaborate honorifics, including Protector of the Nation and Chosen One. Elections were held occasionally. Turkmenbashi won them with results approaching perfection. 99% approval ratings were not unusual. Opposition candidates were technically allowed, though they generally supported Turkmenbashi entirely. At one point, he declared himself president for life. Later, he removed the concept of term limits altogether, rendering the title somewhat redundant. Despite all this, Turkmenbashi insisted he was a humble servant of the people. He claimed to dislike excess praise, while unveiling yet another statue of himself. In perhaps his most ambitious act, Turkmenbashi attempted to reshape history. School textbooks were rewritten. Ancient civilizations were reinterpreted to place Turkmen people at the center of global development. Historical events were adjusted where necessary. Facts, it seemed, were flexible. When Turkmenbashi died suddenly in 2006, the country entered a period of quiet uncertainty. His successor would inherit not just a nation, but an alternate reality, built almost entirely around one man's self-image. Even today, traces of Turkmenbashi's worldview remain embedded in the culture, architecture, and collective memory of Turkmenistan. A reminder that absolute power does not always lead to chaos or brutality. Sometimes, it leads to renamed months, banned opera, and a golden statue that follows the sun. When Sapar Murat Niyazov, known as Turkmenbashi, died in 2006, many observers assumed that Turkmenistan might slowly move away from the extreme personality cult he had created. Instead, the country demonstrated something rare in history: continuity. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow was not a revolutionary figure. He did not rise through popular demand or dramatic political struggle. He was a dentist, specifically Turkmenbashi's personal dentist. After Turkmenbashi's sudden death, Berdimuhamedow emerged as the leading figure almost immediately. The transition was presented as orderly, calm, and entirely natural. Elections were held. Berdimuhamedow won by a comfortable margin that suggested both popular support and a complete absence of alternatives. At first, Berdimuhamedow appeared to distance himself from his predecessor's excesses. He quietly reduced references to the Ruhnama. He restored some banned cultural activities. There was cautious optimism that Turkmenistan might be entering a more conventional phase of governance. This optimism did not last long. Rather than dismantling the personality cult, Berdimuhamedow inherited it, studied it, and began making revisions. He adopted the title Arkadag, meaning protector. Later, this evolved into Hero Arkadag, just to avoid ambiguity. Statues of Berdimuhamedow began appearing across the country. Some were gold. Others depicted him on horseback, often in heroic poses, gazing into the distance as though surveying a nation that already belonged to him. Public praise returned, but with a new aesthetic. Where Turkmenbashi had focused on books and philosophy, Berdimuhamedow preferred performance. He sang on national television. He wrote songs about horses. He performed these songs himself. He released rap verses praising the nation. He performed duets with his grandson. These broadcasts were mandatory viewing. One of Berdi Muhammado's greatest passions was horses, specifically the Akal Teke horse, a breed native to Turkmenistan. He wrote poems about them. He commissioned monuments to them. He declared national holidays in their honor. At one point, he was filmed racing horses, winning effortlessly, and receiving medals for his athletic excellence. This footage was broadcast repeatedly. Berdi Muhammado also cultivated an image of physical perfection. He appeared in videos lifting weights, firing guns, riding bicycles, and driving race cars. In one instance, state media released footage of him performing donuts in a rally car through the desert. The message was clear. The leader was not only wise and benevolent, he was the most capable human in the country. When rumors circulated that Berdi Muhammado had died in 2019, state television responded not with clarification, but with a music video. It showed him alive, healthy, and lifting weights, set to inspirational music. This was considered sufficient proof. Like his predecessor, Berdi Muhammado also engaged in subtle reality editing. He banned the word coronavirus from public discourse during the global pandemic. The disease was not officially acknowledged, though preventative measures were quietly enforced. Masks were discouraged. Mass events continued. Public statements assured citizens that the nation was entirely unaffected. This was, once again, state policy. Berdi Muhammado's control extended into architecture and city planning. Entire neighborhoods were demolished and rebuilt in white marble. Ashgabat became a city of enormous empty boulevards, pristine buildings, and very few visible people. Guinness World Records were pursued aggressively. The largest indoor Ferris wheel, the largest architectural star, the most marble-clad city. Records were collected like trophies. Eventually, in a move that surprised no one familiar with the system, Berdi Muhammado stepped aside, but not away. He transferred the presidency to his son, ensuring continuity not just of power, but of spectacle. Turkmenistan did not abandon its personality cult. It modernized it. What began as a golden statue following the sun evolved into a leader who sang, raced, lifted weights, and rewrote reality through performance. Turkmenbashi built the stage. Berdi Muhammado learned how to dance on it. Ujan Bedel Bokassa began his life far from imperial ambition. He was born in what was then French Equatorial Africa, and later served in the French army, fighting in multiple conflicts and earning a reputation as both disciplined and volatile. When he returned home, the country was newly independent and politically unstable. In 1966, Bokassa seized power in a military coup, overthrowing his cousin, the sitting president. The transition was swift, largely bloodless, and initially welcomed by a population tired of corruption and uncertainty. For a brief period, Bokassa ruled as a conventional strongman. Then, slowly, the tone began to change. Bokassa developed a fascination with grandeur. Titles accumulated. Uniforms became more elaborate. Portraits grew larger. In 1976, Bokassa made an announcement that surprised even his closest allies. The Central African Republic would cease to be a republic. It would become an empire. He crowned himself Emperor Bokassa I, ruler of the Central African Empire. The coronation ceremony was among the most expensive state events in African history. It was modeled closely on Napoleon's coronation, down to the costumes, choreography, and symbolism. A custom imperial crown was commissioned, adorned with thousands of diamonds. The throne was cast in gold. Imported horses, carriages, and uniforms arrived from Europe. The cost of the ceremony consumed a significant portion of the nation's annual budget. At the time, much of the population lived in extreme poverty. World leaders were invited. Most declined. Those who attended watched as Bokassa crowned himself, placing the crown on his own head, a gesture meant to convey destiny rather than democracy. Bokassa did not see himself as a tyrant. He saw himself as a father figure. He frequently referred to himself as the nation's patriarch, claiming to have dozens of wives and more than 100 children. Some estimates place the number even higher. Family members were appointed to government positions. Loyalty was rewarded lavishly. Disloyalty was not. Bokassa's rule became increasingly erratic. He issued decrees based on personal mood rather than policy. Ministers were dismissed suddenly. Some disappeared from public life altogether. One of his most infamous policies involved education. School children were required to wear uniforms produced by a company linked directly to Bokassa. The uniforms were expensive and unaffordable for many families. When protests emerged, Bokassa interpreted them not as dissent, but as personal betrayal. International attention increased. Reports surfaced of extreme punishments and abuses of power. Foreign governments grew uncomfortable, though many continued to support him quietly for strategic reasons. Bokassa's relationship with France was particularly complex. He admired French culture deeply and maintained close ties with political figures in Paris. At the same time, his behavior became increasingly difficult to defend publicly. In private, even allies described him as unpredictable. Bokassa also cultivated a reputation for theatrical intimidation. He was known to attend trials personally. Sentences could change mid-hearing. Judges understood that outcomes depended less on law than on the emperor's expression. Rumors followed him constantly. Some were exaggerated, some were not. What mattered more was the atmosphere they created, one of fear, confusion, and absolute authority. The empire itself was short-lived. In 1979, while Bokassa was abroad, France withdrew its support and assisted in a quiet coup. The empire collapsed almost overnight. The republic was restored. Bokassa fled into exile. Years later, he returned to the country, where he was tried and convicted on multiple charges. Some sentences were later reduced or overturned, reflecting the ongoing instability of the legal system he had helped create. Jean Bedel Bokassa spent his final years largely removed from power, his imperial dreams reduced to photographs and fading headlines. His story is often remembered for its excess, but beneath the gold crowns and theatrical ceremonies lies a simpler pattern. A man who mistook absolute control for destiny and discovered too late that even empires built on spectacle eventually collapse under their own weight. Nicolae Ceausescu ruled Romania for more than 2 decades, and during that time constructed one of the most elaborate and unsettling personality cults in Eastern Europe. Unlike some rulers who drifted gradually into excess, Ceausescu was deliberate. He studied power. He observed it carefully. In the early years of his rule, Ceausescu was viewed internationally as a reformer. He distanced Romania from Soviet control and earned praise from Western governments for his apparent independence and nationalism. But behind the scenes, Ceausescu was developing a different vision. one shaped not by Europe, but by a visit to East Asia. In 1971, Ceausescu traveled to North Korea, where he met Kim Il-sung. What he saw there left a deep impression. The mass rallies, the choreographed devotion, the banners, chants, and synchronized crowds. A society arranged entirely around one man's image. Ceausescu did not see propaganda. He saw a blueprint. Upon returning to Romania, he began reshaping the country in subtle but persistent ways. Public praise intensified. Portraits appeared everywhere, in schools, offices, factories, and homes. Speeches grew longer. Applause became mandatory. State media began referring to Ceausescu using increasingly elaborate titles. He was called the genius of the Carpathians, the Danube of thought, and the architect of Romania's destiny. These phrases were not metaphorical. They were official. Poems were written in his honor. Songs praised his wisdom. Children memorized verses celebrating his leadership and recited them in school. Ceausescu's wife, Elena, rose alongside him. Despite limited formal education, she was presented as a world-class scientist and intellectual. Her name appeared on research papers. Institutions were named after her. Questioning this narrative was unthinkable. Romania, under Ceausescu, became a place where reality was carefully curated. Statistics were adjusted. Failures were rebranded as successes. Shortages were framed as patriotic sacrifices. To pay off national debt, Ceausescu imposed extreme austerity measures. Food was rationed. Electricity was limited. Heating was reduced during winter. Entire cities lived in near darkness to preserve energy. Television was restricted to a few hours per day, almost all of it dedicated to Ceausescu's speeches, visits, and praise. While the population endured scarcity, Ceausescu pursued grand projects. Most notable was the Palace of the Parliament, one of the largest buildings in the world. Entire neighborhoods were demolished to make room for it. Historic districts vanished. Churches were moved or hidden behind concrete walls. The building rose as a symbol of permanence, even as daily life became increasingly fragile. Ceausescu also maintained one of the most extensive surveillance systems in the Eastern Bloc. The secret police, known as the Securitate, monitored conversations, correspondence, and behavior. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Trust eroded quietly. People learned to speak carefully, even at home. Despite the control, Ceausescu appeared increasingly detached from reality. He believed in the sincerity of the praise. He trusted the numbers he was shown. He assumed the crowds adored him because they were told to. In December 1989, that illusion collapsed. During a public speech meant to demonstrate unity, the crowd reacted unexpectedly. Murmurs spread. Then, boos. Ceausescu paused, visibly confused. He raised his hand, attempting to restore order. The moment was brief, but irreversible. Within days, the regime fell. Ceausescu and Elena attempted to flee. They were captured, tried in a rapid and chaotic process, and executed shortly thereafter. The man who modeled his rule on Kim Il-sung's total devotion system discovered too late that spectacle without belief is fragile. Ceausescu built a nation where everyone clapped, but very few believed. And when the clapping stopped, there was nothing left to hold the illusion together. Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya for more than 40 years, and during that time, managed to construct one of the most confusing political systems in modern history. Unlike many dictators, Gaddafi did not simply seize power and demand obedience. He believed he had solved politics itself. In 1969, Gaddafi overthrew Libya's monarchy in a military coup at the age of 27. Young, charismatic, and fiercely anti-Western, he positioned himself as a revolutionary figure, not a dictator, but a guide. Early on, he rejected traditional titles. He insisted he was not a president, not a king, and not a prime minister. Instead, he called himself leader of the revolution. Officially, Libya had no government, no state, no ruler. In reality, it had Gaddafi. To explain his vision, Gaddafi wrote a short manifesto known as the Green Book. It was meant to replace capitalism, socialism, democracy, and representative government entirely. The book claimed that elections were inherently fraudulent, political parties were a form of dictatorship, and parliaments were obsolete. True democracy, Gaddafi argued, could only exist through people's committees, local councils that theoretically governed everything. In practice, these committees answered to him. The Green Book was mandatory reading. Schools taught it. Universities analyzed it. Public buildings displayed it. Libya's political system became known as the Jamahiriya, meaning state of the masses. It was presented as a world-changing innovation. Outside observers found it difficult to explain. Gaddafi's public appearances added to the confusion. He dressed unpredictably, sometimes in military uniforms, sometimes in flowing robes, sometimes in outfits resembling ceremonial costumes. He traveled with a group of female bodyguards, trained and armed, who were presented as symbols of liberation and loyalty. When visiting other countries, Gaddafi often refused hotels, preferring to sleep in a traditional tent, which he would pitch in city parks, palace gardens, or diplomatic compounds. This tent followed him across the world. Gaddafi's speeches were legendary. They were long, wandering, and philosophical. He spoke about tribal identity, colonialism, gender roles, and the failures of modern society, often within the same sentence. Listeners struggled to determine whether he was profound, incoherent, or both. He proposed strange international ideas. He suggested merging Libya with neighboring countries. He advocated for a single African currency backed by gold. He envisioned himself as a unifying figure for the entire continent. At home, dissent was not tolerated. Opposition groups were suppressed. Critics disappeared quietly. At the same time, Gaddafi funded hospitals, education, and infrastructure, creating a system that was neither fully repressive nor genuinely free. This contradiction defined his rule. He also had a habit of inserting himself into global conflicts. Libya supported various revolutionary movements around the world, sometimes ideologically opposed to one another. Enemies and allies shifted constantly. Over time, Gaddafi became increasingly isolated. Sanctions damaged the economy. International relations deteriorated. Yet inside Libya, his image remained omnipresent. Portraits stared down from buildings. Quotes from the Green Book were painted on walls. Children grew up reciting revolutionary slogans they did not fully understand. Gaddafi seemed convinced that his ideas would outlive him. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, protests spread across Libya. Gaddafi responded with disbelief. He claimed the protesters were drugged, that foreign agents were manipulating them, that the people still loved him. In one televised speech, he spoke for nearly an hour, promising to fight house by house, while insisting he held no official power. The contradiction was complete. The regime collapsed later that year. Gaddafi's final days were chaotic, confused, and far removed from the philosophical certainty he once projected. The man who claimed to abolish the state discovered that when everything revolves around one individual, there is nothing left to hold it together once that individual falls. Gaddafi did not rule through a clear ideology. He ruled through belief in his own ideas. And when belief replaced structure, the system became as unpredictable as the man himself.